The autumn wind bit through the timber walls of the modest house on the edge of town, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves. Inside, 16-year-old Tessa stood frozen in the kitchen, staring at the shattered porcelain fragments scattered across the wooden floor. The ornate bowl, her stepmother's prized possession brought all the way from St. Louis, lay in pieces, its delicate blue pattern now a mockery of wholeness. "What have you done?" The voice came from the doorway, sharp as broken glass. Tessa's hands trembled as she knelt to gather the shards. "I'm sorry, Mother Clara. I was trying to wash it, and it just..." "Just what? Leaped from your clumsy hands?" Clara Whitmore stepped into the kitchen, her silk dress rustling with each calculated movement. In town, she was the picture of refinement, the elegant wife of James Whitmore, the successful freight hauler whose wagons brought goods across the territories. But here, with her husband gone on another 3-week journey, the mask could slip. "I'll fix it. I can glue..." The slap came without warning, snapping Tessa's head to the side. She tasted copper on her tongue. "You'll fix it?" Clara's laugh was caustic. "With what? Your worthless hands? Do you know what that cost? Of course you don't. You've never earned a single penny in your pathetic life. You just sit here, taking up space, eating through our stores like the pig you are." Tessa remained on her knees, silent. Speaking only made it worse. She'd learned that in the year since her father had married Clara, thinking he was giving his daughter a mother's care while he traveled the freight routes. He'd been so lonely after Tessa's mother died of fever 3 winters past. Clara had seemed kind then, patient with the grieving girl who carried too much weight and too much sadness. The kindness had lasted exactly 1 week after the wedding. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." Clara grabbed Tessa's chin, forcing her head up. "Do you understand what an embarrassment you are? Mrs. Henderson asked why I never bring you to the church socials. What was I supposed to say? That I have a stepdaughter who looks like she could eat half the congregation?" "I don't eat that much," Tessa whispered, then immediately regretted it. Clara released her chin only to grab a handful of Tessa's hair. "Don't you dare talk back to me. Your father might be blind to what you really are, but I see it. A lazy, gluttonous burden who does nothing but cost this family money and reputation." She yanked Tessa to her feet by her hair, then shoved her against the iron stove. Tessa's shoulder struck the metal with a dull thud, and she bit back a cry of pain. "Pick up every piece," Clara commanded, reaching for the broom leaning against the wall. "And when you're done, you'll scrub this entire floor until I can see my reflection in it." Tessa bent to the task, her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Not in front of Clara. Never in front of Clara. But as she reached for a particularly sharp shard, Clara brought the broom handle down across her back. "Faster!" Another blow, this one across her shoulders. Tessa's hands shook violently now, and the porcelain piece sliced into her palm. Blood welled up, bright red against her pale skin. "Now you're bleeding on my floor. You useless, worthless..." Clara grabbed her arm, nails digging deep enough to break skin. "I curse the day your father brought you into my life. Everything would be better if you'd never been born. Better yet, if you died with your pathetic mother instead of dragging yourself through year after year, poisoning this household with your presence." She punctuated the words with another strike of the broom handle, this one catching Tessa across the side of the head. Stars exploded in Tessa's vision. She stumbled, fell, her hand sliding through the broken porcelain and her own blood. Get up, you fat disgusting!" A knock at the door silenced Clara mid-tirade. For a moment, neither of them moved. Clara's chest heaved with rage, the broom handle still raised. Tessa remained on the floor, tasting blood from where she'd bitten her tongue. Another knock, harder this time, deliberate. Clara's expression transformed with practiced ease. The fury melted away, replaced by a pleasant smile that never reached her eyes. She smoothed her dress, patted her hair, and stepped over Tessa as if she were merely another piece of furniture. "Just a moment," her voice rang out, sweet as honey. Tessa heard the door open, heard Clara's affected gasp of delight. "Oh, Mr. Calloway, what a pleasant surprise. James isn't home at present, but he should return within the week. Was there something I could help you with?" "I can see that." The voice that answered was deep, rough as tree bark, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Which is why I came today specifically." Tessa, still on the floor behind the kitchen wall, heard Clara's confusion. "I'm afraid I don't understand." "I think you do, Mrs. Whitmore. I've been standing outside your fence for the past 5 minutes, heard quite a bit, saw even more through your kitchen window." The silence that followed was absolute. Tessa's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew who Ryder Calloway was. Everyone in town did, though few had much to do with him. He was a mountain man, one of those solitary figures who came down from the high country once or twice a year to trade furs and replenish supplies. Her father had mentioned him before, something about buying pelts on credit and owing Calloway for a previous transaction. "I'm sure whatever you think you heard," Clara began. "I don't think anything, ma'am. I know what I heard and what I saw." Heavy footsteps entered the house uninvited. "Where is she?" Tessa forced herself to stand, using the counter for support. Her legs shook and her vision swam, but she wouldn't meet this stranger, this witness to her humiliation, from her knees. Ryder Calloway filled the kitchen doorway. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet and a few inches, with shoulders broad enough that he had to angle slightly to pass through the frame. His beard was thick and dark, streaked with early gray despite his face suggesting a man in his mid-30s. He wore buckskin and homespun wool, and he smelled of pine smoke and weather. His eyes, pale gray like winter ice, took in the scene with unsettling precision. The broken bowl, the blood on the floor, the welts rising on Tessa's arms, the blooming bruise on her cheekbone. "Sir," Clara's voice had an edge now, the sweetness cracking. "This is a family matter. Discipline is necessary for proper—" "That's not discipline." Calloway's words were quiet, but they carried the weight of absolute certainty. "That's cruelty, and I've seen enough of it to know the difference." Clara drew herself up, attempting indignation. "How dare you come into my home and—" "Your home?" Calloway glanced around. "Last I checked, James Whitmore's name is on the deed, and his daughter's blood is on your floor. Tell me, does he know you use broom handles on her when he's gone?" "Tessa is clumsy and lazy. She destroyed an expensive piece of chum. She's a child. Accidents happen. What happened here wasn't an accident." Calloway turned his attention to Tessa. His expression didn't soften exactly, but something in it shifted. "How long?" Tessa's voice came out as a whisper. "How long what? How long has she been doing this?" The truth sat in her throat like a stone. She couldn't say it. If she said it, it became real. If it became real, her father would have to choose between his wife and his daughter, and Tessa couldn't bear the thought of causing that divide. Her father had been so happy when he'd found Clara, so relieved to have a partner again. "Answer him," Clara commanded, but her voice lacked its usual venom. She was calculating now, Tessa could see it, trying to determine how much damage control would be needed. "It's fine," Tessa said. "I'm fine. I deserved—" "No." Calloway's interruption was gentle but firm. "You didn't. Don't let anyone convince you that you did." He turned back to Clara, and his expression hardened again. "When James returns, I'll have words with him, but right now, I have a proposition for you, Mrs. Whitmore." Clara's eyes narrowed. "What kind of proposition?" "You clearly find the girl burdensome. You've made that abundantly clear in the past 5 minutes. I, on the other hand, could use an extra set of hands up at my cabin. Someone to help with the daily work, cooking, cleaning, processing hides. It's honest labor, and it would take your burden off your hands." Tessa's stomach dropped. Processing hides? Living in a mountain cabin with a strange man? It sounded like trading one prison for another, possibly worse. But Clara's expression was transforming. Not to anger this time, to calculation, to possibility, to something that looked almost like joy. "You want to take her?" "If she's willing. And if you're willing to let her go." Calloway's tone was carefully neutral. "Seems to me it would solve your problem. You wouldn't have to endure her presence anymore. She'd have work and a place to stay. Everyone benefits." It was brilliant, Tessa realized with a sick twist in her stomach. He was offering Clara exactly what she wanted, Tessa gone, in a way that wouldn't require Clara to be a murderer or face the scandal of throwing out her stepdaughter. All Clara had to do was agree, and she could be rid of Tessa with a clear conscience in the eyes of the town. "I would need to discuss this with James, of course," Clara said, but her eyes were bright. "It's such a significant decision." "Of course. Calloway nodded. I'll return when he's back. Give you both time to think it over. He looked at Tessa again. In the meantime, if there are any more accidents, I'll hear about it, and next time I won't knock before coming in. It was a threat, plain and simple. But somehow, coming from him, it didn't feel threatening. It felt like a shield. He left without another word, the door closing behind him with quiet finality. Clara turned to Tessa, and for the first time in months, she smiled. It was a terrible smile, full of victory. Clean this up, and don't even think about telling your father the truth when he returns. Because if you do, I'll make sure he knows you've been stealing from the pantry, lying about me, trying to turn him against me. Who do you think he'll believe? His loving wife, or his burden of a daughter? Tessa said nothing. She knelt and continued picking up the pieces of the broken bowl, each sharp edge a small punishment for existing. James Whitmore returned 12 days later, his wagons loaded with goods from the Eastern Territories. He was a large man, weathered by years of outdoor work, with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. Those eyes had grown sadder since his first wife's death, but they lit up when he saw his home, his wife waiting on the porch, his daughter visible through the kitchen window. Clara greeted him with warmth, helped unload what needed unloading, prepared his favorite meal. She waited until after dinner, until he was comfortable and fed, before she brought it up. James, dear, something happened while you were away. I've been wrestling with it, and I need your wisdom. He set down his coffee cup, instantly attentive. What is it? Is something wrong? It's about Tessa. Clara's voice was perfectly calibrated, concerned, sad, but accepting. You know Mr. Calloway, the mountain man who buys pelts from you? Ryder, yes, of course. What about him? He came by while you were gone with an unusual request. She paused as if gathering courage. He's looking for help at his cabin, someone to assist with daily tasks, and he asked if Tessa might be willing to go. James's face darkened. He what? Now, before you get angry, hear me out. I know it sounds strange, but I actually think it might be good for her. She's been so withdrawn lately, so unhappy here. And you know how much we struggle to make ends meet with the three of us? If she had honest work, a purpose, she might flourish. She might find confidence. It was masterfully done. Clara had spent days rehearsing this, Tessa realized from her position by the stove. Her stepmother had woven truth and lies together so seamlessly that even Tessa almost believed it. I don't know, James said slowly. She's just a girl. And Calloway, he's a good man, but he's rough. Lives alone up there. Which is exactly why he needs help. And think about it, James. Up there, she wouldn't face the judgment she faces here in town. People can be so cruel about her weight, her shyness. At least on the mountain, she'd be judged by her work, not her appearance. Tessa's father was silent for a long moment. Then he called out, Tessa, come here, please. She emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her father's face softened when he saw her, as it always did, and she felt the familiar guilt twist in her chest. He loved her. She knew he loved her, but he also loved Clara, and Clara was poison. Did you know about this? He asked gently. Mr. Calloway mentioned it, she said carefully. And? What do you think? This was her chance. She could tell him everything. The beatings, the starvation, the cruel words that had worn her down more thoroughly than any broom handle. She could show him the bruises still yellowing on her ribs, the scars on her arms from Clara's nails. But she looked at Clara's face, saw the warning there, and she thought about what her father would do. He would be torn apart. He would have to choose. And whatever choice he made would destroy something, either his marriage or his relationship with his daughter. I think, she said slowly, that it might be good to learn a trade, to be useful. The words tasted like ash, but they had the desired effect. Her father relaxed slightly, though worry still creased his brow. I won't force you, he said. But if it's what you want. A knock interrupted them. Clara stood quickly, perhaps a bit too quickly. That'll be Mr. Calloway. I asked him to stop by tonight so we could discuss the details if you were amenable. James shot her a look. Surprise, maybe a hint of frustration that she'd presumed his agreement, but he nodded. Show him in. Ryder Calloway entered the house, and somehow he seemed even larger in the small parlor than he had in the kitchen. He nodded to James, ignored Clara entirely, and glanced at Tessa with those pale, assessing eyes. "Calloway," James said, standing to shake his hand. "My wife tells me you've made an unusual offer regarding my daughter." "That's right." Ryder's voice was as rough as Tessa remembered. "I need help. She needs work." Seemed practical. Practical. James repeated the word slowly, tasting it. "You've been up in those mountains a long time, Ryder. You used to working with people? With girls her age?" "No," Ryder said bluntly. "But I know how to teach, and I know how to treat people right. She'll work hard. I'll make sure of that. But she'll work safe, she'll eat regular, and she'll have a roof that doesn't leak. More than some can say for their circumstances." The last part was delivered while looking directly at Clara. She stiffened, but said nothing. "I don't know," James said again. "She's my daughter. My responsibility." "She is," Ryder agreed. "Which is why I'm asking your permission, not just taking her. But I'll be straight with you, James. I was here 12 days ago. I saw some things, heard some things, and if those things are still happening, then maybe your daughter needs a different roof over her head." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. James turned slowly to look at his wife. "What things?" "He's lying," Clara said immediately. "Trying to manipulate you. He probably wants—" "I saw your wife hit your daughter with a broom handle," Ryder continued, his voice never rising but somehow filling every corner of the room. "Saw her drag her by the hair, shove her into the stove, scratch her arms until she bled. Heard her call that girl worthless, disgusting, a burden who should have died with her mother. That specific enough for you?" The silence that followed was suffocating. James's face had gone pale, then red, then pale again. He looked at Tessa, and she saw the question in his eyes. She wanted to lie. She wanted to protect him from this truth. But she was so tired. She pulled up her sleeve slowly, revealing the crescents of scabs where Clara's nails had torn her skin. Then she turned, lifting the back of her shirt just enough to show the long, dark bruises striping her back. Her father made a sound like he'd been punched. "James, she's exaggerating. She's clumsy. Clara's voice rose, desperate now. "Get out!" James's voice was quiet, shaking. "Get out of my sight before I do something I'll regret. You can't possibly believe— Get out!" Clara fled to the bedroom, slamming the door. James sank into his chair, his face in his hands. Tessa stood frozen, not knowing whether to approach him or retreat. Finally, he looked up at her. His eyes were wet. "How long?" "Does it matter?" she whispered. "It matters to me. Since you left on your first trip after the wedding." He flinched as if she'd struck him. "Tessa, God, I'm sorry. I thought I was giving you a mother. I know what you thought, Papa. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were happy," she wanted to say. "Because you'd been so sad for so long, and Clara made you smile again. Because I love you more than I love myself." But she just shook her head. James turned to Ryder. "You'll take care of her? Keep her safe?" "I'll keep her safer than she's been here," Ryder said. It wasn't quite a promise, but it was close enough. "Then take her." James's voice broke. "Take her before I convince myself I can fix this, because I don't think I can. Not now. Maybe not ever." "Papa—" "No, Tessa, listen to me." He stood, crossed to her, and pulled her into his arms. She couldn't remember the last time he'd hugged her. "You're not a burden. You've never been a burden. And what happened here, it's my fault. I brought that woman into our lives. I left you alone with her. I was too blind to see what was right in front of me." He held her for a long moment, then released her. "Go pack your things, whatever you want to take." "I don't have much," she said. "Then it won't take long." The journey up the mountain took 2 days. Ryder set a steady pace but checked frequently to ensure Tessa could keep up. They spoke little. She didn't know what to say to this strange, rough man who had pulled her from one life and was taking her to another. She didn't know if she should thank him or fear him. The cabin, when it finally appeared through the trees, was smaller than she'd expected but sturdier. It was built of thick logs chinked with clay, with a stone chimney that promised real warmth. A small barn stood nearby, housing 2 mules and a milk cow. Behind the cabin, she could see racks for drying hides, a smokehouse, and what looked like a root cellar dug into the hillside. "This is it," Ryder said, dismounting. Not much, but it's solid. Stays warm in winter, stays cool enough in summer. Waters from the creek, cold and clean year-round. He helped her down from her mule, the first time he'd touched her since they'd met. His hands were rough but careful. "You'll sleep in the loft," he continued, opening the cabin door. "I'll take the main room. There's a curtain you can pull for privacy. Privy's out back. You need anything in the night, you call out. I'm a light sleeper." The interior was sparse but organized. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall. A rough table and 2 chairs occupied the center. Shelves lined another wall, holding supplies, tools, and what looked like several books. A ladder led to the loft space above. "I'll teach you the work," Ryder said, setting her small bag down. "Processing hides, cooking, preserving food, mending. You'll earn your keep, but I won't work you to death. Fair?" "Fair," Tessa echoed, though she wasn't entirely sure what fair meant anymore. "One more thing." Ryder turned to face her directly. "I don't hit. Not for mistakes, not for breaking things, not for any reason. You understand? If you drop something, you pick it up. If you burn dinner, we eat it burned, or we eat something else. If you're too tired to work, you rest. I need help, not a slave, and I sure as hell didn't bring you here to treat you the way she treated you." Something in Tessa's chest loosened slightly. "Why did you bring me here?" Ryder was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My sister. She was about your age when our stepfather started on her. Different kind of cruel, but cruel all the same. I was already grown, already gone to the mountains. By the time I found out, by the time I came back..." He trailed off. "Let's just say I learned to recognize the signs, and I won't walk past them again. Not ever." "What happened to her?" Tessa asked quietly. "She survived. Married a good man, moved to Oregon, has 3 kids now. But it took years for her to stop flinching when someone raised their voice. Years before she could trust again." He looked at Tessa. "I'm not saying I can fix what happened to you, but I can give you time and space to heal. And I can make damn sure no one hurts you while you do." It wasn't a declaration of affection. It wasn't a promise of happy endings. But it was honest, and somehow that mattered more than anything else could have. "Okay," Tessa said. "Okay," Ryder echoed. "Now you hungry? I've got venison stew left over from yesterday." The first weeks were harder than Tessa expected, though not in the ways she'd feared. Ryder kept his word. He never raised his hand, never raised his voice unless calling to her from a distance. But the work was demanding, and her body, unused to such sustained physical labor, ached constantly. She learned to scrape hides, to recognize which pelts were prime and which were second-rate. She learned to work the tanning solution, a noxious mixture that made her eyes water but produced soft, supple leather. She learned to smoke meat, to recognize edible plants, to read the sky for coming weather. And slowly, carefully, she learned that when Ryder said "good work," he meant it. That when she dropped a tool, he simply picked it up and handed it back. That when she burned the cornbread, he ate it without complaint and said, "Less salt next time, maybe." One evening, perhaps 6 weeks after her arrival, she was working by the fire, mending one of Ryder's shirts. He was at the table, sketching something on a piece of paper. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer weighted with tension. "You know," he said without looking up, "you don't have to stay here forever." Her hand stilled on the fabric. "What?" "This arrangement. It doesn't have to be permanent. Once you're old enough, once you've learned enough skills to make your own way, you can leave. Go wherever you want. I'm not trying to trap you here." "I never thought you were," Tessa said slowly. "Good." He set down his pencil. "But I also want you to know, if you want to stay, you can. Not as my servant, as..." He struggled with the word. "As family, I suppose. Whatever that means." Tessa didn't know what to say to that. She'd spent so long being unwanted, being a burden, that the concept of being chosen felt alien. "I'll think about it," she finally said. "Fair enough." They returned to their respective tasks, but something had shifted. A door had opened, just a crack, showing a future that might hold more than just survival. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the high peaks with brutal efficiency. The cabin, true to Ryder's word, stayed warm and dry. They settled into a routine: morning chores, midday work on hides and repairs, evening meals by the fire. Ryder taught her to read better. She'd learned the basics from her mother, but he expanded her knowledge with his small collection of books. She taught him to make her mother's recipes, the ones she'd memorized in those precious years before everything had fallen apart. On particularly cold nights, when the wind howled through the trees and snow piled against the door, they would talk. Ryder spoke of his years in the mountains, of the animals he'd tracked, the storms he'd weathered, the strange beauty of the high country. Tessa spoke, haltingly at first and then with growing confidence, about her mother, about the happy years before death and Clara had entered their lives. She never spoke about Clara directly. Not yet. That wound was still too raw. But one evening in deep January, when the fire had burned low and the darkness pressed close, Tessa found herself saying, "Do you think I deserved it?" Ryder didn't ask what she meant. He simply said, "No." "But I am." "No," he repeated more firmly. "Whatever you're about to say about yourself, whatever poison she put in your head, the answer is no. You didn't deserve it, you don't deserve it, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying." Tessa felt tears on her cheeks and didn't bother to wipe them away. "She said I was worthless, that I was too fat, too clumsy, too stupid to ever be anything but a burden." She was wrong. "How do you know?" "Because I've watched you for months now. You're not clumsy, you're careful, you're not stupid. You learn faster than most adults I've met. And your weight?" He shrugged. "It's just your body. It doesn't make you good or bad, worthy or worthless. It's just you." It was perhaps the kindest thing anyone had ever said to her. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me for telling the truth," Ryder said. "Thank me when I make good biscuits. Haven't managed that yet." She laughed, surprising herself. When had she last laughed? Not a bitter sound, not a desperate sound, but a genuine expression of humor? She couldn't remember. Spring brought her father. Tessa was outside checking the rabbit snares when she heard hoofbeats on the trail. She turned to see a familiar figure on horseback, and her heart leaped into her throat. James Whitmore looked older than she remembered, thinner. There were new lines around his eyes, and his shoulders seemed bowed by invisible weight. He dismounted slowly, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. "Papa," Tessa finally said. "Tessa." His voice broke on her name. "God, look at you. You're different." She was different. Months of mountain air and regular work had changed her. She was stronger now, her arms corded with new muscle from scraping hides and hauling water. Her face had lost some of its puffiness, not from starvation, but from simple, healthy activity. But more than that, she stood differently, straighter, no longer trying to make herself small and invisible. "You're well," he finished. "You look well." Ryder emerged from the cabin, alerted by the sound of voices. He nodded to James but didn't approach, giving them space. "Can we talk?" James asked. "Please?" They walked to the creek, away from the cabin. The water rushed past, swollen with snowmelt, and Tessa remembered her father bringing her to a creek like this when she was small, teaching her to skip stones. "I left her," James said abruptly. "Clara, 2 months after you came here, sent her back to St. Louis with enough money for passage and not a penny more." Tessa's breath caught. "Papa, I should have done it sooner. Should have done it the moment Calloway told me what he'd seen, but I was a coward. I wanted to believe there was some explanation, some way to make it all make sense." He turned to face her. "There wasn't. I asked around town, quietly. Found out she'd been spreading lies about you for months. Found out people had seen her treating you poorly but assumed I knew, assumed it was with my approval. Found out I'd been a blind fool who chose a woman over his own daughter." "You didn't know," Tessa said. "I should have known. I'm your father. I should have seen." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I can't undo what happened, can't give you back that year, but I came to ask, will you come home? The house is empty now, it's just me. I'm not traveling as much. We could try again." It was what she'd wanted once, what she'd dreamed of in those dark months under Clara's roof. Her father, realizing his mistake, choosing her, bringing her home. But now, standing in the spring sunshine with the creek rushing past, she wasn't sure. "I don't know," she said honestly. "This place, it's become home too. Ryder's taught me so much. I'm useful here. I have work. You could have work in town. I could help you open a seamstress shop and face everyone who watched Clara humiliate me, everyone who believed her lies. Tessa shook her head. I'm not ready for that, Papa. Maybe someday, but not now. James's face fell, but he nodded. I understand, I do, but Tessa, can I at least visit? Can we try to rebuild what I broke? She looked at him, this man who had loved her but failed her, and she saw not just his mistakes but his genuine remorse. He had left Clara. He had come here. He was trying. Yes, she said. You can visit. We can try. Thank you. He pulled her into a hug, and this time she hugged him back without reservation. Thank you for giving me another chance. James became a regular visitor over the following months. He would ride up once or twice a month, bringing supplies, news from town, and sometimes just himself. Slowly, carefully, they rebuilt their relationship. Not what it had been. They could never get that back, but something new. Something more honest, perhaps, built on harder truths. And Tessa continued to grow. She learned to trap, to hunt small game, to track deer through the forest. Ryder taught her to shoot, and while she'd never be a marksman, she could hit what she aimed at more often than not. She learned the names of plants, which would heal and which would harm. She learned the patterns of the seasons, the language of the weather, the secrets of living close to the land. On her 18th birthday, Ryder gave her a knife. It was a beautiful piece, the handle carved from antler, the blade sharp enough to split hairs. Every person in the mountains needs a good knife, he said gruffly. This one's yours. Take care of it, and it'll take care of you. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the weight, the balance. Thank you. You're welcome. Also, he pulled out a piece of paper. This is a deed to 40 acres adjacent to my property. It's yours if you want it. Build a cabin, start a homestead, do whatever you like with it, or don't. But it's there, so you always have options. Tessa stared at the paper, at the deed made out in her name, land of her own, security, independence. I can't. This is too much. It's not too much. It's what you've earned, what you deserve. Ryder cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the emotion of the moment. Besides, I'm getting old. Might need a neighbor I can trust to check on me from time to time. You're not old, Tessa said, but she was smiling. Old enough to be thinking about the future, about what happens when I'm gone. I've got no wife, no children, but I've got you. And I figure that counts for something. Well, it counted for everything. News from town filtered up slowly, carried by her father or by the occasional traveler. Clara had remarried in St. Louis to a man with money and status. James had sold the house in town, bought a smaller place, and continued his freight business with renewed dedication. Some people asked about Tessa, he reported. Some were genuinely concerned. Others had simply moved on to the next scandal. Tessa didn't much care either way. She had found something in the mountains that she'd never had in town, not just safety, though that was precious enough, not just work, though that mattered too. She had found the space to become herself, whoever that was, without the constant weight of someone else's expectations or cruelty. Some mornings she would wake before dawn and climb to a high ridge to watch the sunrise. The valley would fill with golden light, and she would breathe deep, filling her lungs with cold, clean air. On those mornings, standing alone on the mountain, she felt more herself than she ever had surrounded by people. She thought sometimes about Clara, about the woman who had hated her so thoroughly for simply existing. She wondered if Clara ever thought about her, ever felt remorse. Probably not. People like Clara rarely did. But Tessa had learned something important. Clara's opinion had never mattered. It had only hurt because Tessa had given it power, had believed it might be true. Now, with distance and time and the steady, quiet affirmation of her own competence, she could see it for what it was. The bitter poison of a small, cruel person trying to make someone else small and cruel too. It hadn't worked. Tessa had emerged from that house damaged but not broken. She had found, or been found by, someone who saw her as a person, not a burden. Someone who had asked, "Send her to me instead," not as a business transaction, but as in rescue. She had been sent. And in being sent, she had been saved. Not in the dramatic way of stories, where the hero slays the dragon and everyone lives happily ever after, but in the quieter, harder way of real life, through work and time and the slow, painful process of healing. Through learning to trust again, to value herself again, to believe that she deserved safety and kindness. On particularly difficult days, when the old wounds ached like phantom pains, she would remember that first night in the cabin. Remember Ryder saying, "I don't hit, not for mistakes, not for breaking things, not for any reason." And she would remember that she had picked herself up off the floor of her father's kitchen, left that place of pain, and built something new. She was Tessa Whitmore, daughter of James, survivor of Clara, student of Ryder Calloway. She was 18 years old, and she owned 40 acres of mountain land. She could tan a hide, track a deer, read the weather in the clouds, and cook a decent meal with whatever was at hand. She could stand straight without fear of the blow that might come, and that, more than anything else, was worth celebrating.